Hi, welcome everyone. I'll just give us a few moments to enable everyone to connect to the webinar before we begin today. So you can see that we have a few more people joining us. Give a few moments more for everyone to gather. Okay, so thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm Kirsten Shankland and I'm Product Manager here at Epigm, based in the UK and responsible for programmes across our research strand. As you may be aware, Epigm are part of Oxford University Press and they create and develop interactive online training programmes for institutions, supporting them across core activities. I'm delighted to say that our latest research course, Advancing Your Research Career, Strategies for Research Leadership, has launched. The new course supports early to mid-career researchers in taking a reflective and strategic approach to developing and managing their research careers. My colleague, Lucinda Cook, our Academic Partnerships Manager based in Australia, will be able to answer any questions related to the course either during the webinar or later on by email as well. So, as we know, research careers are diverse and there is no one-size-fits-all approach. Career pathways can be precarious, crossing fields, disciplines and sectors. They often need to be balanced with other professional roles, such as teaching. So today, we would like to consider with our panellists how universities can best support leadership development for early and mid-career researchers, foster healthy and sustainable research cultures, as well as the significance of mentoring and guidance within a research career. I have the pleasure of introducing our three panellists, including Dr. Shelda Dubowski, who is one of our lead advisors for the new course, alongside David Bogle at UCL. Shelda is an international consultant to the higher education sector, specialising in academic and researcher development. She brings a wealth of experience as Professor of Higher Education Development and a Deputy Vice-Chancellor. Shelda has also published several books in this area, including The New Academic and Developing Academics. I'd also like to welcome Professor Ross McLennan, Pro-Vice-Chancellor Research Services at Midcareer University. Ross is also the President of the Australasian Research Management Society, representing over 3,500 members from across the region. And we also have with us Dr. Yi Lian Chu. Yi Lian is currently a Mary Overton Senior Research Fellow at Flinders University. An early career academic, Yi Lian earned her PhD from the University of Sydney. In 2015, she moved to Cambridge, UK to study worms in colder weather at the MRC Laboratory of Molecular Biology. So thank you for our panellists today. Before we begin formally, I have a few practical notes just to run through for attendees. There's a Q&A box to the right-hand side of your screen, which you'll see along with the chat box. And you're welcome to pose questions for our speakers to discuss at the end, time permitting. And for anyone who requires closed captioning, there's also a CC button to the top right of the screen, which will enable captions. The webinar is also being recorded and we will share a recording with you following the event. If anyone needs any technical assistance, please privately message Emily Viganola via the chat or email epigminfo@oup.com. So finally, in this opening section, I would like to pass over to Shelda for our acknowledgement of country.
Many thanks, Kirsten. So before we start the formal proceedings, we would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the many lands on which the panellists and some of our audience members are joining. I'm joining from the lands of the Whadjuk Noongar people in Western Australia, and my fellow panellists are joining from Karuna country, that's Yi Lian, and Ross is from the Wellamagatul clan of the Durug Nation. We would like to pay our respects to the traditional owners, their ongoing custodianship of country, and their continuing connection to lands, water, and community. We acknowledge elders past and present and would like to extend this respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people present here today. Thank you, Kirsten.
Thank you so much, Shelda. I'm going to begin today really by asking you, Shelda, from your perspective, what are some of the common challenges to a successful research career?
Thank you. So what we've chosen to do is I'm going to focus in on the individual, and Ross will then follow me in terms of talking at that larger institutional systemic level as well. So I do a lot of coaching and work with academics and researchers at all levels. And it's fascinating to me that we see ongoingly these similar challenges that really do create quite difficult environments for researchers to be successful. When David and I were putting the course together, we actually thought really hard about this and we were mapping them out. And one of the key challenges that certainly I and David have seen over the time of building this program has been the need for a researcher to formulate and consolidate that identity, who they are as a researcher, what they're trying to achieve, where they can play to their strengths, and how that can be consolidated, evolved, and adapted as opportunities and also experience grows in that space. And that sounds a very basic thing for people to learn to do and to understand. But without good mentorship and good guidance from experienced researchers, we see many who flounder and have difficulty. And so the program has been really working hard to try and build that in. Allied to that is, in addition to that identity, is that agency, that capacity to then build a strategy and plan to execute that vision and to make it happen and to build that depth and the evidence of being successful in that space. And that's particularly challenging too, I think, for early to mid-careers, where many start to get a little too diversified. And so they can't specialize because they're too busy trying to hold too many balls and juggle up in the air. So being able to focus in there and think a little bit more deeply about what it is that they want to deliver and having that large vision and direction and purpose that will take them there is quite an important part of being successful. But it is a challenging space that many people grapple hard with and don't necessarily get right initially. And so we see quite a few early mid-careers sitting with what I call midolescence, where they haven't quite got that identity and shape together. I see another risk that I'm grappling with a lot of people at the moment, and that is that the last 2 years have been particularly troublesome for many. Opportunities have dropped, collaboration has dropped, opportunities to go and travel have disappeared. And as a result of that, a lot of people are being pushed to just survive rather than thrive and evolve. And so that reductive line of sight, the focus on the present rather than the future, has become quite a big risk for, I think, many researchers as they go through. There are two other elements that I think are large challenges that we need to be very conscious of as we sponsor and support researchers. The first is that it is the most likely environmental place where people can be marginalised and isolated. And unless they have good sponsorship, good mentors, good generous supervisors, and we know that isn't the case, that there are some really aberrant personalities in academia. And unfortunately, if you are working with a supervisor who's jealous or mean-minded, it can really be a very inhospitable place for somebody. So being marginalised and isolated can often be the exit journey out of research, and that's a tragedy when people have talent and possibilities and they're not being given those opportunities. So this program has been designed to give them more support and guidance in that. And the other piece that I think is more and more critical is building the visibility, the profile, and understanding about impact and engagement to enable those partnerships and relationships to be really strong. But again, these don't necessarily come naturally to researchers. And they require a very nuanced understanding of the environment in which one's researching and the way in which one needs to operate into the future, and what the goals of research are. So that sense of agency, purpose, destination, journey, to me, they are critical challenges that we need to make sure we're helping people address. Thanks,
Fantastic.
Kirsten.
Thank you, Shelda. Those keywords really: identity, agency, and strategy. Ross, if I could come to you, as we've said, there's kind of two parts to this question. And how do you feel universities can best support some of those challenges that Shelda has taken us through, and leadership and management development?
Thanks, Kirsten. Thanks, Shelda, for that great scene setting, I think, which identifies a lot of the key topics which we'll be covering in this discussion. And the more I've been thinking about researcher development over the many years, and particularly in the lead up to this conversation, the one word which keeps coming to the front of my mind and has been increasingly there over the last few years is complexity. Just the range of different factors which need to be covered. And I'll sort of probably tackle this from the a more granular level in terms of the different things which, as this program was being developed, the list of things which can't be covered within the program is infinitely longer than what has been covered incredibly well within this program. And it's evident in that increasing breadth of responsibilities, but also the opportunities which are presented to researchers as they're growing in their careers. And it's how to navigate this, which is, I think, a key challenge for individuals and for institutions to put in place the tools and the practices and the support mechanisms to help them to do that. And just to touch on a couple of areas, if I look at the number of different granting schemes, granting opportunities which are being presented now, and which researchers are expected to engage with, there's those large funding agencies, there's philanthropic organizations, there's industry actors as well. And it is an expectation that researchers know how to navigate each of those, how to translate their research ideas in a way which is understandable by these different audiences, different needs, different languages, and different modes of interaction in terms of when within a gestation of an idea, it's the best place to engage with your peers and to engage with these external actors. And that's just to get the money to be able to do some of the research. There's also how we tell our stories. The ways in which we're looking to articulate the impact of our research and the research outcomes, both formally and also informally. It's as if researchers these days need to be always on. There's always another opportunity to tell that story. There's always a way where you need to articulate to a different audience. And again, the expectation for any one individual to know how to write a dense document which is going to influence policy in government, but also to be able to use Twitter to engage with a broad organization on the same topic. There's a whole range of different skills which need to be brought into there. And the work itself seems to be becoming increasingly complex as well. Multi-partners, partners from different disciplines, different collaborators from different time zones, working with people at different career stages, means that the academics as they grow need to have these skills in direct and indirect management. And something that Shelda touched on, which I think is incredibly important, it's finding that balance between specialization, making sure that you are have a deep expertise in your discipline. You're the expert and the person to go to be able to answer those questions and to be able to impact on your peers, but also the ability to take that deep knowledge and to find different ways to translate it into other outputs, to work with others and to sort of have that complexity. And don't get me started on the legislative and regulatory environment, due diligence, national security, intellectual property, and that's just the 3 meetings I had before coming into here. There's a whole range of different process factors which need to be considered. And your question wasn't about that, it was about the roles of university. And of course, it's important to start with that the success of any institution is dependent on the success of the individuals who are carrying out the research. So institutions should be feeling compelled. They should be looking at every opportunity to provide those skills. And some of those are formal and others are by having the right environment and the right peers and mentors to be able to grow. And it's having clearly articulated expectations and clear articulation around where those supports can come from researchers, and making sure there's a clear clarity in the expectations. not only of the developing researchers, but of senior leaders and senior researchers to be able to help to reach down the ladder, so to speak, and help people up to talk from their experience, to provide that role modeling and best practicing. And for universities to, and all institutions, to invest their time and their resources in developing in-house and bringing in expert tools which can help people to develop. And in the context that not every leading researcher is going to become a research leader. You can have that expertise and work as a sole expert, but the additional step comes from those skills which are working with others and being able to communicate. And that's sort of where an institution's role is, in my opinion. It's to identify those things where you can be more than just providing that framework for developing a detailed discipline knowledge.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as you say, Ross, acknowledging that complexity and the responsibility of the institution is key. Julianne, if I could come to you next of all, I would really love to get your perspective as an ECR. To what extent did you feel that you were supported in giving guidance when it came to career management and leadership development in those areas?
Thanks a lot, Kristen. Hi, everybody. So I feel like I should have started thinking about all of these things at the very early stages of my research, which was when I was a PhD student. But I didn't really do this, and I think this was for multiple reasons. I think there was the understanding at the time that PhD support or higher degree research support was mostly about success in your research project. And perhaps at the time there was less focus on how you would develop transferable skills. Like even this idea of transferable skills wasn't something that people were actively thinking about. As an early career researcher, I have started to understand that spending time thinking about my career development is time that I should be putting aside often weekly, probably. Because there's so many things to do. As Ross and Shelda have said, there's a constant deluge of forms that need to be filled and students to teach and research to do, that it seems like career development is something that falls by the wayside. But it is an active process, and this was not something I recognized in the early stages of my research career. Something I wanted to say about research, and perhaps so I'm only speaking from an academic perspective, but I find that in research you have to know to ask for stuff. And it's sort of interesting because you can ask for things and people just say yes, but if you don't ask for it, you won't know that those opportunities even exist. So what I've recognized in really good career development workshops and programs that I've been to and institutions that I've been to is that those opportunities are told to people so they know that they can ask for it if they need to. And I think this is one of the great strengths of this program. Also, I think as an early career researcher, we acknowledge that between our peers, there's a huge diversity in experience, in demographics, and in our lives. And so what institutions need to recognize is that not everyone knows ahead of time what to ask for, or that what opportunities are there. So any program that empowers early career researchers to be able to ask the right questions to themselves and to their peers and to their mentors and to their sponsors, that's something that is really powerful to the researcher. Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much, Julianne. And I think, like you say, the challenge around dedicated time and carving out that time and making sure that there is time available to focus on career development. I also wanted to touch on something around responsibility and sort of the onus of responsibility. And we've talked about the institutional responsibility as well. And at this point, we also have a poll for attendees, so an interactive poll that should launch on your screen, which I think you can see now or in a moment. And so this asks, what changes do you think your university could implement with regards to a positive research culture? The poll is anonymous, and we would love to see some of your feedback, some of your thoughts around that. And meanwhile, it leads me into my next question, really, for Ross and Shelda. If I could come back to you. How would you define a positive research culture? And how can universities help to create effective research cultures that contribute to researcher well-being and development?
And that's a great question, Kirsten. So for the next 4 hours, I will be giving you my views on what makes a good research culture. Yeah. And tongue only slightly in cheek. I'm not going to talk for that long because I've been clearly told that there's a time limit. But culture is difficult, and it's a difficult thing to build. And I think we've just heard that one of the great things about a positive culture is one where asking questions and looking for help is something that's encouraged. I think that's a really positive sign of any organization, is that when people who are new to the organization and those who've been there for a long time acknowledge that it's very unlikely that one person has all the answers, and that's okay. And to go out and to find the right solution from people who've got more experience in a particular area, it is completely all right and should be encouraged. It's much better to find that person and to share that knowledge so that you can collectively, as an organization, continue to improve. But from my perspective, by the side, it all begins with integrity. I think it's a really challenging environment which we're working in. There's a myriad of metrics and league tables and different ways which we're all getting measured between our institutions and within our institutions. And that universities need to be really clear in their communications internally, that it's not just about quantity, but quality is incredibly important. But good research is that which is done responsibly. And of course, that's following the rules of ethics and data management. But it's also, being good corporate citizens. It's looking to collaborate. It's looking to have that due recognition of your peers and to give back as well. As we talked about before, around that reaching down, the mentoring role is part of creating that culture where the goal is to increase the ability and the knowledge of the collective rather than just the individual. And that's within your organization, with your collaborators, but also in how you communicate the outputs of that research and really trying to understand what the big questions are outside and making sure that the outcomes of that research are communicated, articulated, and are put into practice in that outside world, whether that's in the policy space or whether that's sort of in the hard sciences in terms of making things which are going to impact how people go about with their their daily life. And of course, that's still got to allow room for individual ambition and growth and experimentation and pushing the boundaries of what we know. That is research. After all, it's around that generation of new innovations, be that new artworks or new poetry or new widgets as part of a piece of machinery or a new solution to a biomedical problem. To continue to push that on, but not in a win at all costs mentality. Yeah. It's not a case of competing for the sake of winning. It's around how we can work together to understand these unknowns to come up with new knowledge. And so the final bit, sort of from my perspective, is it's again the role of the institutions is to be really clear around the importance of well-being and that work-life balance. And policies are good in that space, making sure that the regulatory framework of institutions allows and promotes having that balance and flexible ways of working. But practice is much better, and making sure that there's a focus on visibly acknowledging, visibly recognizing, visibly rewarding those people who are working for the better good, who are finding flexible approaches, who are exhibiting good community building skills, and making sure that there's that model throughout the research environment, that it becomes part of the way of doing things. And I think those different aspects all fit together in my mind to at least provide the building blocks for building a positive research culture.
Absolutely. And Shelda, if I could come to you with that question.
Continuing on from that discussion, Ross, I think you've raised some really critical foundations for creating positive environments for people to succeed right across the board. But fundamental to that is the quality of leadership. And it still bothers me a lot that universities generally and research groups don't actually talk much about leadership. They have a proxy for leadership in terms of the individual metrics of success of that person, and that still that individualistic approach rather than the collective approach is often seen as a success indicator, and they're the people who may end up with control over the well-being of many people. So we don't talk enough about the caliber of leadership and the qualities that underpin really important leadership. And certainly I'm working with a number of professors at the moment who are still grappling with who they are and what they bring to that, and how they can start to build some of the practices that Ross has mentioned, the relationship building and the boundary spanning and the capacity building, while still making sure that they maintain a degree of excellence in their own right as researchers. So I think focusing in on constructive leadership, avoiding the risks of micromanagement and perfectionism, and that very individualistic focus, the self-focus, are really important parts of creating an environment for collective success and individual success as well. And yet they're very hard because, of course, we want quality research. We want it to be of high integrity and caliber. And that can mean that for the early part especially, one needs to be supervised closely. But one also has to be allowed to start to build that agency and encouraged to have that learning orientation and growth as well. Leanne mentioned that the time for career development is really critical. Absolutely it is. But that means generosity in a supervisor to say, yes, go and attend a course. I've had people who've been told they can attend one of 2 days, not both, because it's time away from the bench. And these are problematic things because development needs time and it needs sponsorship as well. I think enabling groups to be highly diverse and to bring in different opinions and perspectives, to build in structural enabling of mentorship, and to encourage people to learn how to become visible and to express their developmental needs, to get sponsorship from more senior researchers, advocates, and to build in opportunities, both structural and systemic, but also driven by that individual and where they're going. So ultimately, it is about relationships. This form of cultural setting up for success is about giving people space to evolve and grow with confidence and without feeling like anything they say or do is a risk. Mm-hmm. And so we have to build these really proactive, positive environments for everybody to be able to reach their own potential.
Absolutely. Thank you both for those answers. And I know in the course when we were kind of working through research culture, we're thinking about psychological safety in those environments that foster, you know, the best from people. I'll return to our poll because we have had a few responses in the poll as well. Thank you so much for sending these through. Again, there's quite a few around time allocation, dedicated support, to enable people to follow their research pursuits and also their development as well. Inclusivity of professional staff. Making time available for professional development and researcher development. Offer more support workshops. There's so many here. Thank you so much for those responses and engaging in that with us. And there's also quite a lot around mentoring and mentoring arrangements too. And that kind of leads us into our next point. Leanne, what advice would you give an early career researcher around working effectively with a mentor?
Yeah. So I think a lot of early career researchers, when we think about who to ask to be a mentor, it's always like, find the successful person who gives good advice. And I think that can be a great mentor. But also mentors come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. And I would say that I've been very fortunate to have great mentors. But they're also the best ones are the ones who have a sort of conflict-free idea of what a successful research career is like, or what my research career could look like. And they can advise me, therefore, in a more objective way. So I've also been very fortunate to have very supportive research supervisors. But of course, they have a conflict of interest if, let's say, I wanted to move to a different field or to leave the group or to do something else. So although I've always felt very well supported, I do recognize that they are in many ways conflicted. So I would say that, you know, mentors come in all shapes and sizes. And if you can try and find a mentor, perhaps who is a bit more objective, someone from a different department or something, that can be extremely helpful. I would say one of the challenges with finding a mentor is this fear of asking very busy people for even more of their time. And You wouldn't know unless you ask. And I have asked people who have said they're too busy, but I've never regretted asking. Um, Even just making that connection was really, really useful for me. Of course, everything is a trade-off because as an early or mid-career researcher, you also have, a lot of things to do. So you are also busy. So if you wanted to have a mentor, then it does need to be a little bit of, time and effort put into that relationship. And some people like it more formal, and some people like it more informal. But I think it's important to, at the beginning, have an idea of what you'd like to get out of that relationship. Um, and I think I touched on the fact that you don't need to have just one mentor. You could have multiple. And this is because, some people are great at certain things and you might just want to tap into that thing. Like, if you wanted to have a future research career in science policy and or in a government policy role, but you don't know how to get there, you could talk to someone who has this experience and ask them to mentor you through that specific process. But yes, so I would say, asking for help, asking someone to be a mentor is an excellent first step, and don't be afraid to reach out.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Julian. And I think that sort of echoes some of our conversations as well around that it's okay to ask and it's okay to reach out to people and kind of have those conversations. So thank you for that. So my last question really for our panel discussion would be, how can early career researchers set realistic goals, and what are some of the ways that they can use to track progress? And if I could come to Shelda first of all on that.
So this is a really tough element because you can't just set a goal and then pursue it for the next so many years and say, okay, I've done it. And that's one of the challenges. It's a very evolutionary process. I think fundamental to setting good goals and getting them done is one needs to understand one's own personal and career drivers and how that identity and ambition is shifting over time and circumstance. A young researcher who's suddenly got young children has to do some accommodating around how that works. If the supervisor changes, that too sets different contexts in place. They also need to understand the institutional expectations as to what's expected, what's perceived to be success. And these goalposts are shifting rapidly. Increasingly, that need to be able to show impact and engagement, and that people are noticing what one does, even from an early career phase, is challenging. So when we talk about setting goals and career planning, I encourage people to think about the 3 to 5 years. As I mentioned earlier, that reductive line of sight of just survive this year, I just get through things I've got on my diary list, has meant that a lot of researchers are starting to become quite focused just on the small things they're trying to achieve. And if they fall over, which often they do, that setback and failure can become insurmountable in the motivational space for that individual. So learning to see it as a longer journey that has many different pathways to achieve the ultimate goals and vision is really important, I think, for this. And it keeps one motivated. It enables you to build a range of goals that all help achieve that broader space. Evaluating and measuring your success along the way, and not just through the standard research metrics, but thinking more clearly about what does success look like and how would I articulate that. And so one of the areas that I work a lot with people on is helping them think about their narrative building, the building of stories about your journey and the success. And one of the things I've been doing with people is a narrative sandwich. So you need to talk about the why, what it is I'm trying to achieve. How did I do that? How am I doing that? And the so what. And so what is it achieving, which is your evidence building. And so we need to give people much more experience in being able to articulate what's inside, what's coming through, and how that's all shaping. And that means too that once you've got your goals, it's very important to have a clear understanding of project management. making sure that everything you touch leads to really good productive outcomes that set you up for the next stage. There's a lot of people with great intentions, but time priority management is a real weakness for many researchers. So it's not just about the planning, it's the execution, the documentation, moving through to the next piece. So I think they're the key things from my perspective.
Absolutely, and that narrative building and portfolio building, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
Ross, could I come to you on that question?
You can do. Sorry, I've just been plunged into the darkness. I've been sat still in lights for too long, and the automatic lights have gone off. I'll wave around after the meeting. I think Shelda's response there sort of has covered everything. There's 3 points just to really emphasise. The first of which is agency. It's what you do now changes what your future will be. So having that 3 to 5 year plan and making steps along that path now are really important. So that this isn't, the future research career isn't something which will happen. It's something that you make. So it's taking those active steps to seek out mentors, to take those opportunities to learn new skills, to take the leap into a particular collaboration. That's for the individual researcher to sort of grab those reins, grab those opportunities, and to take them. And life will change, and as you move along that process, your goals may change, or your path towards those goals may also change. So it's having real clear ambitions, real clear indicators of success, and capturing evidence of that success along the way, so that you can reflect, you can look back, and whether that's through journaling or some other reflective practice, to make sure you know where you're going, you know what you've done along the way, and you're knowing how you think you're tracking against that process, so that you can continue to be iterative. You can keep the book open and continue to write that future yourself, and not be afraid to reach forward as to where you thought you were going to be in 3 to 5 years time, and reevaluate as you find new opportunities or new things develop. And some of that will come from the experiences you have, but others will come from, I think, acknowledging that it's rarely a solo journey. It's making sure that you've got that network of mentors, plural, bringing different bits of expertise, but also you're using your peer network. It's very unlikely that you're the only researcher at that stage in your career, in your institution, or in your area, geographic area. And it's reaching out to people who are going through similar challenges, looking to grow in similar ways or different ways, and comparing notes around the routes which are being taken and the things which have been found along that journey. I think it's through that, bringing that collective, again, it all comes back to culture, working out a way to how you can navigate that towards a successful outcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for those responses. And yeah, I really like that planning in the mid and longer term, action planning, journaling, and those ECR, MCR networks as well. Thank you to our panelists. The Q&A is open, so there are a few questions coming through. If anyone has any additional questions, please feel free to put them in that Q&A chat. We do have a few minutes more to talk with our panelists today, so it'd be fantastic to have your questions as well. I will just look through the questions that have come in. Shelda, I may direct this first one to you if I can. So we have a question. Can I kindly ask the approaches utilised in this programme and course? So I wondered if you could give a little bit of an overview and background of that.
Sure. So some of the meta themes that are in the program do relate to this notion of building agency, building self-awareness, planning ahead, and building a very strategic emphasis from that self-knowledge, but in conjunction with seeking guidance and building a bigger network of support. So I think they're very much sitting within that framing. So when we have program modules, for example, relating to mentorship and sponsorship, and to project management, to engagement, to leadership, to building teams, and all of these modules are really focusing on not just becoming a good performer as a researcher in your own right, but recognising it's within an institutional context, there is support available to you, and also understanding that there are certain ways in which you can accelerate and excel using that support base there. So it's emphasising strongly researchers are not widgets operating in isolation. They're sitting within a big context of structural guidance and support. And also the support is there, as Yi Liang was saying, the support is there if you reach out. So the modules have really strongly emphasized that getting agency and going out and finding out more, but also seeking guidance and support from others and looking for good models. Because you learn so much by watching what others have done or are doing or getting input from others. Is that enough, Kirsten?
Yes, that's fantastic. That's a great overview. Thank you, Shelda.
Can I just add a little bit to that? Sorry,
yeah, absolutely.
Shelda is absolutely on the call, the expert in terms of the pedagogical approach and how we've brought that together. But one of the things which I really enjoyed seeing in the program was the acknowledgement that not only are researchers not a widget within a big machine, but in different disciplines, there's different challenges which are being faced and different ways to overcome that. And it's the use of the case studies and the examples and the best practice, which, you know, it's not the answer for any particular challenge. It's really opening up the opportunities to be able to draw on different levels of expertise and to grow in a way which is relevant for an individual's context, you know, within the institution, within their stage and within their discipline, which I think is a really the only way which you can address this.
Fantastic, thank you. And Yi Liang, if I could come to you with sort of the same question and your kind of thoughts on the program as one of our reviewers as well.
Yeah, so one thing I really enjoyed about the program is it had like a combination of giving you information and also importantly making you digest that information and write down your thoughts. And again, it's one of those things where you don't spend enough time, I think, putting aside time in our calendar to think about those things and to write down our thoughts on that. And once it's written down, it sort of articulates values and a vision that we might not have actually said out loud or even talked to other people about. And it covers quite a few different things, from research project management, which I think is something that is starting to, get workshops and stuff about this, of profile building, but also about leadership. And leadership is so much about how our values, is so individual. And so writing down those thoughts and reflecting on those thoughts with the guidance given by the program, I think that was one of its great strengths.
Thank you. Thank you so much, all of you. We have another question. Again, I'll pose this to the group, to all of you. What are some strategies, tips, or exercises for a researcher in the midolescent stage to work on so that they can move away from that stage?
Would you like me to start with that one, seeing I gave you the...
Yeah, that would be great.
Your word.
It's one of the areas that I think is really important. We do focus a lot on early career, and this was one of the reasons this program has been targeting early to mid-career. It is not saying once you've reached that mid-career phase, you're done. In actual fact, that is a time, as Yi Liang was saying, you're actually having to then step up into leadership. And so you are responsible for others. You are responsible for building the next phase. If your PhD has started to be bled dry and you've got all your publications out from it, you've got to then reinitiate new spaces and think about where the growth and the evolution's been happening in your research specialism. Maybe you're becoming more a methodological expert. Maybe you're someone who's thinking about working through students to build a broader body of knowledge. So there's quite a bit of soul-searching that happens in that midolescent phase. It's also a time where many academics and researchers become targeted to do more governance and leadership. And so even if they are research intensive, they're being asked to step up into the looking out for the team, the guiding of programs of research. And so the dilemma about how do I keep going as a productive researcher whilst also enabling the growth of others does become a much bigger scope of work to be thinking about. So I think the same principles that we were talking about throughout our discussion still apply for that midolescence, but it is recognizing there are risks attached to just sitting back and saying, well, I've done my foundational work, I'll just bumble along now as best I can. one has to be really focused and to recast, rebuild, evolve, create the new space. And so again, it's that agency. Where next? It's an exciting adventure, but it's daunting.
Thank you, Shelda. Yeah, the agency and strategy kind of coming through
Again. Yeah.
And can I pose that to our other panelists as well? Julianne, if I could start with you.
Yeah. I think it is, so I am approaching the mid-career by some standards. It's sort of hard to know now. Am I early career or mid-career? And one thing that I hear from my colleagues who are well in the mid-career is that is the point where support often dries up, because it's like when you're in the early career, it's like you're new, so here's the information for the new person. But when you're in the mid-career, it's like, okay, you figured it out now paddle along the rowboat until you reach the shore. But it is an incredibly challenging time. And it is one of the things that people start to feel is I feel a little bit stuck. It's like they see this kind of image of success that they're the professors or their senior respected elders have achieved, and they're like, maybe that's not the vision of success that I would like. But they don't see another way. So how do they move forward and progress their career past this stage? And I think what people are starting to recognize is it's also about what you feel you value in your research career, and given opportunities to do service and governance and leadership, sometimes it's a way to say, this is something I really value, supporting people to communicate their science well, or to lead a research team where all my students move into careers that they feel fulfilled, and recognizing that those are your values, and even though that might not fit the traditional conventional view of success, that is what's important to you. So I feel like to move out of a phase where you feel like you're a midolescent, perhaps it's time to recognize those values and what you personally value, and to try and invest the time into those things in the research career.
Yeah, absolutely. Identifying those drivers, I guess. Thank you, Julianne. Can I come to you, Ross, on that question as well?
Absolutely, and Julianne raises an interesting point. I mean, it's I think whilst it's a definitional one. I mean, whilst funding agencies often try to go, okay, there's the group in 1 to 5 years post PhD, and then 5 to 15 years post PhD, and then the rest. I think in reality, it's unlike being a teenager, and I speak as a former teenager. It's clear there's a nomenclature as when you're in there, and all the challenges which come with that phase of life. Parents just hope that their children are going to grow out of it, and it'll be fine. The same is not true from what we're talking about here. It requires that agency, and it requires choice. And I think choice not only to say no to some things, but also to seek out those things which bring meaning to individuals, and meaning to how they want to see their research develop, and to see the outputs of that impact on the wider society. And that comes down to a number of, how do you overcome that inertia? One, don't say yes to every opportunity for governance and committee sitting. There are enough hours, there's more hours in the week where you can sit on committees than you can actually do research. So you need to manage your time well there. But it's looking out those opportunities, and hopefully institutions have visible examples of the variety of ways which you can be successful. But to seek those out, and as we've been talking about before, to ask those questions, to ask for guidance and mentorship around those different areas, to be able to step out of it. And that may be by going deeper within your particular discipline and finding the sub-discipline, which is what really ignites your passion. Or it may be of looking broader and outside your discipline, and sort of looking out of that area of where you can apply your expertise and your knowledge, which is going to impact on something which sort of hits that meaning and passion element of your interests and your personal desires.
Thank you, all of you, for your answers to that question. We have some more questions coming through for us now. I'm just going to have a little look through. So we have a question. What's some key advice that you can give for young and starting early career researchers who are struggling with establishing their vision and identity as a researcher? We've kind of touched on areas of this, but if there's any further advice.
Liliane, do you want to start? Because you're very close to it, aren't you? You've seen it. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So for me, I think there are many people at the very early stage of the career who feel themselves as almost like a funnel from their research supervisor. So they're kind of a reflection of that supervisor or a small chunk of that research supervisor's vision. And although it might feel that way, that's definitely not true. You know, you're an individual researcher, you have your own goals and vision, and a good supervisor would encourage you to be able to articulate that vision and see what you actually value and want to do. I think it's also a time where people start to ask themselves what in their career they would like to develop further. And at that time, you're really good at these technical skills and these very research heavy skills, but it's starting to kind of go into the team management and the leadership. That's when it starts to get more difficult. So I guess how would I advise someone who's at that stage of trying to shape their own identity is to really talk to lots of people who are navigating that part of their lives. And for a long time, for me personally, I thought that all I could do was a very small thing that I have always done. And that is perhaps only because maybe it's a confidence thing. Maybe I felt like I'm only confident in this small thing, so that's the only thing I can ever do. But I mean, that's certainly not true because I learned to do those things at some point. I went from beginner to expert, so I couldn't do that in other things. And it's, I guess, important to recognize that it's okay to not know everything and to kind of expand your horizons, to have conversations with lots of people around the world, and the internet is so great for that now. And to sort of recognize that there is support out there, and there is one there could be one conversation that could change your whole research future. So reaching out to ENCR networks, to really diverse ENCR networks, not just in your institution but beyond. That could be something that says that you could use your skills for so many other things other than what you've already been doing.
I think we're at an exciting time in terms of careers and how you can use research. I think it's not that long ago. It's certainly within my lifetime that the career trajectory would be you do your PhD and then you work for your supervisor for a bit, and then if you're lucky you get the office next to them and sort of you can generate your own lab there. And if you're really ambitious, you can go to a different institution. And that was the only path of success. I think we're now at a point where there's active encouragement. Maybe that's too much, but at least there's an acknowledgement and an understanding that boundaries are porous and careers don't go in straight lines. It's a wiggly line at best, and sometimes it goes back round on itself. But people's careers, you may come out of the PhD, you may be starting your ECR journey, but then you may go and work in a policy setting or in industry or something else. But then that's not the end of your career in academia. You can come back in as a collaborator or come back in for employment within academia and carry on your learning skills, and you're bringing all that together. So as Liliane says, it's looking outside that linear trajectory and looking at all those different inputs which you can bring into that. And that means the complexity balloons out immensely to start off with, but sometimes you need to do that to see where you best fit within that ecosystem, and you can take yourself forward.
And I think if we look at the uncertainty of in that early career phase, especially, it's often temporal in that you've got, if you're lucky, you have 3 years, maybe a bit longer, but often shorter. And so you are looking at needing to get some runs on the board and to understand what the game is and how your metrics for success are. So I think other key tips I would offer is understand the environmental success metrics, and then work with key people to guide you in terms of how you will deliver that. So that's number one. Number two is, and it comes back to Liliane's talk earlier about transferable skills and Ross's talk about, there's different ways to make this work. And so I encourage people to think about plan A, plan B, plan C. So look at ways in which whatever you're doing would actually be good foundational leverages to get into alternative pathways. And certainly I have seen people meandering through some different experimental things to work out which ones are best for them, because we don't always know what our predilection and strengths are going to be. But the other key thing I would suggest, and we haven't talked about it today really, is sponsors. So mentors are important in that mentors are guiding you on that journey as you intuit it and work it out and understand the environmental influences. Sponsors are there for when you're ready to step to the next level. And you have to be confident enough to signal that you're ready for that sponsorship and willing to take the risk of stepping forward when the doors are opening. And so I think the courage to have faith in yourself, to be able to activate on any opportunities that are given to you is really important. But also looking out for those people who can open those doors. And that's an important part of career success for early career. I'm ready. It's time. Give me some opportunities. Shorten my cycle by 5 years by letting me into this network, or nominating me for this thing, or giving me an opportunity to show I've got great leadership. And I think they're really important parts of that culture setting, which is what we're talking about earlier too.
That's fantastic. That's hugely valuable.
If I might just add something briefly, I feel like, the one thing I've been saying is, reach out and have opportunities, but also, and the counterbalance of that is, as an early career researcher, sometimes there's a lot of pressure to do everything. And yes, and it feels like you have to do everything, because it's like you have to be successful at everything. But there's also a balance in understanding when it's okay to say no to stuff. And I have to confess, I'm really bad at it. Because I always feel like everything is important and I have this opportunity, so I have to say yes. But there's only so many hours in the day, and I like to get my 7 hours to sleep at night. So I think it is also important to recognize that it is important sometimes to say no, even if it's just for your own sanity and mental well-being. And part of having good mentors and peer support groups is recognizing what things you can say no to, and that is perfectly fine and good.
Absolutely. I think that's really key. And I think that touches on some of our other discussions around being able to say no, being able to ask for help. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time and your discussion today. We don't have time for any more questions, but thank you also to our attendees for those questions and interaction today with the polls. And yeah, thank you again to our speakers. It's been such a pleasure to kind of take this time and discuss with you in these really key areas. So that's it for today. Thank you so much. Myself and my colleague Lucy, we will stay online. If there are any questions about the course, I know there's a few questions coming in directly about the course. So we will keep on the line if anyone wants to stay with us. But otherwise, thank you so much everyone for being here today, and it was fantastic to join you all. Thanks so much. Bye.
Thanks, Kirsten. Thanks, everyone.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Good job, Kirsten.
Hi, Lucy.
Hi, Kirsten.
I'm not sure that there's anyone with us. I can't see any further questions.
Somebody asked if they could trial the course. Davina, are you still with us? You're more than welcome to trial the course if you just get in touch with me. You can see my email address on the slide, and I'd be happy to send you through a trial so that you can have a look at it in more detail. If you've got any questions, you can ask me. Yeah, okay, Davina. Yeah. I'll if you could get in touch with me, I'll definitely send you through trial access to the course. Any other questions?
Okay, I think that's everything.
Yeah, I think so.
Thank you so much for staying on the line, Lucy.
That's okay. Thanks, everyone. And do get in touch if you have any questions. Thanks, Kirsten.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.